Good morning, guys. So this is a follow-up video for the previous one that I did on free will. It's a little bit late coming out, but I've been trying to wait for Mansour's schedule and mine to match. And he has been so busy that I decided to do it myself. So the reason why I was waiting for him was because he was the second person that was there witnessing, and of course has experience with Nathiel. So with the experiment, he would have seen the differences, and I really wanted to get his input on that. So here are the findings of it. First off, let me explain the premise of it, because I didn't feel like I did that properly when I did the video. When you're doing a channel state, of course, you step out of the way, and the goal is to, let whatever's going to come through come through. The basis of the experiment was going a couple levels deeper with that. When you're doing a channel session, sometimes with the information that they can go ahead and bring through, you have your mind monitoring it as far as what's coming through, how it's coming through, what are they really saying, and you always have some type of reaction from that as a channel. Even if you're in a out-of-body state, it's still, you know what's going on, you know what's being said, you could feel it. And so there's the normal expectations in life as far as what is okay and what is not okay. And one thing as humans you have to admit for us is that, we don't like being outside in the zone of what's not okay. So the understanding of it was, putting in simple perspectives, let's just say I'm channeling at a New Age store. And when you go in, there's expectations as far as what information you can bring through, talk about, share, and the general premise is that you leave the client in a better place than you found them. And that seems something so simple, but it's actually huge. Within that binds you into a contract that perhaps you can go ahead and confront issues with the client that is really holding them back. But the client is resistant. Sometimes that happens. And you can't really put it into a black and white saying it's never appropriate to push forward. When from someone that works with energy and works, in an intuitive way, free will, is set up on multiple levels. There's the higher self, there's the conscious self, and the subconscious self. So, okay, you get I don't want to hear this from the intellectual level, but the higher self from the person pushes and says, keep going. Crack the shell, let them see the truth. And so it's always a dance when you're in that intuitive space of knowing when to push forward and when to let go, and knowing where the line is drawn in the sand. And sometimes you can make mistakes, or sometimes you do it just right. You get a reaction, but later on, it was the impetus that they needed to break through a boundary. Maybe you don't know, but it's like the eighth time that someone confronted them on this. And this was the time it took to be able to go ahead and say, you know what, let me relook at this because it keeps coming up. You never know. So it's a hard one to know and do that dance when you're in that intuitive space on what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, and you learn to trust the flow and trust your instincts. In that situation where you're in someone else's space and you're working within there with a client, if the client then makes any sign that they're not receiving this information, okay, you lighten your tone, you lighten the message. And sometimes the only way out of the snafu is telling them what they want to hear. And I know people don't want to hear that, but there's a responsibility there at that point in time to make sure that you are happier after you leave than before you came. How do you think people do that? It's a lot more complex than it seems. And the point that I brought up in conversation with another channel was that if we sign this agreement to be able to read, heal, channel, bring through information, teach, whatever it is that we're doing in the store, because of free will, doesn't that pass on to spirit as far as what information that they bring through? And, let's be clear, I channel angels. Oh, well, it's an angel. They'll say whatever they want to say. No, they won't. They follow free will. So if I make the agreement, they're bound to it because I'm the vehicle. So that narrows the doorway of what they could talk about. Healing. I work with masters in healing. Well, if you make that agreement, you narrow the doorway. And now bringing it into more complex, you have the person in front of you for free will. What are they willing to accept? What are they willing to hear? And you think, oh, well, the intellectual level has that, that right and states it. I'm open to anything. But that's not really true because, again, free will is also given to the subconscious. So what's going on there? Oh, that's going to make me afraid. That's not what I want to confront. I've learned to avoid that, that feeling. And so all of these impulses come together in free will to bring us to a place of defining whether we know it or not, what energy, what frequency we're willing to interact with. Proof of this is how many times we come in front of a healer, how many times we come in front of someone like me that's a communicator, the channel, and intuitive. And we go through the same information, and there's no change. What do you think is the resistance? Why do you think the information stays the level that it has been? Why isn't there anything new? And a large part of that comes into the agreements we make combined with free will. Free will is a lot more complicated than we realize. So the premise of the channel session was to take all of that into account and then say, okay, let's blow the boundaries. Screw my limitations, screw my subconscious, feel on the subject. And let's just open the doorway and say anything goes. I want to hear what I haven't been hearing. I want to hear what I haven't been willing to hear. I want to hear what you're willing to say. What would happen in a channel session if we give permission to say, don't channel it through my will. Channel it through yours. What message do you have for us? Strictly based on what are you willing to say? And don't take my will into account. Would that make a change? And how would that feel channeling it? And how would that sound verbally when they come through? That was the premise of the channel session, to see, is it possible that without even realizing it, we have been limiting the lessons that they're able to give. We were limiting the healings that could be done. We were limiting the information that can come through intuitively. Is there a basis of understanding this idea of free will and their cooperation with it, of actually coming more into alignment with it in the way that it actually works, and taking all of those idiosyncrasies into account and step out of the way in a new way? Would that access more information? Would that access new information? That'd be nice. And see what comes up, what happens. And, Mansour's not here to be able to go ahead and give his perception on this, so I'll give mine as a channel. First off, when he came through, there was a combination between Natiel, Woman of the Forest, and Archangel Anathiel. So they combined energy into one message. I felt all three coming through at once, joining that message into one. That was different. Because normally the way that it works for a channel, they combine all the information on their side, and then he streams it through. And it had been happening where between Nathiel and Archangel Anathiel, that there was a combining happening while speaking, instead of it being streamlined into one stream, where they're channeling it through Nathiel, and then it comes through me. She's been popping up and working with him, and that's been training for me to get used to her energy because of the switch going from him to her as a Speaker of the House. This was very different in the way that it came through. It was a much more cohesive, where I was included in the experience of, instead of it happening in the back room, it was happening with me in the moment. And it allowed the feel of the energy and the information to be very different. The information that came through, in my opinion, was a lot more structured, a lot more direct, not beat around the bush, saying it exactly. And, if you listen to the Freewill Experiment lesson, channel session, it was intense. He confronted us on a lot of our issues that we don't like. We don't want to hear that. And that was a big, big change. Because again, I see this time and time again with channel sessions. We're treated with kid gloves. We're treated like we're, fragile flowers. Don't say anything that would be upsetting. Don't confront. Don't tell us that what we're doing we've done for how many lifetimes and refuse to change. Oh, we don't want to hear that. Don't say anything that could possibly make us scared. Because at that point, you're bringing through negativity. And I remember he had said once, if you're experiencing fear from this lesson, we didn't bring it. You did. It's your fear. Confront it. And it's a very different way that the energy came through of, I'm not here to make you okay. I'm here to tell you the truth. This is what you need to know. Through your non-action, refusing to take responsibility, here are the consequences that you're suffering, and here's where they lead to. That format was very, very different as far as the information that they brought through. They've never been so direct that way before. And as a channel, it was really uncomfortable to hear. Not from the standpoint that I didn't understand what they were saying or that I disagreed with it. The uncomfortable thing was people's reaction to hearing something like that. And it put me in a position of really looking at the fact of having to take responsibility of saying, all this time, what type of information have I been bringing through? How has it been limited by my belief of not being confronted, not willing to hear? And all of the gymnastics that they've had to do to bring through information to make it acceptable to hear. And what would happen if this entire time that I've been channeling Natiel and all those lessons, I say, I can give a crap, just bring it through. how much more straightforward and faster was the potential for growth if you just say the truth, if you just state it as it is. If, we stop forcing them to treat us like fragile flowers that's going to wilt over in a moment of a harsh word. It's, from my perspective on this end of it as a channel, it's mind-boggling and staggering to think how much easier it would have been for the potential of the lessons if they had just been straightforward and not have to dance around, our personal egos. And if you think about it in a session, like, for example, like a session with a therapist, how would a therapist be able to help if they can't actually talk about the difficulties that we're going through, the uncomfortable stuff that we're dealing with, but have to talk about it in a nice way, in a non-confrontational way? And there are points in times where that works on the path because you let the person come to their own conclusion. Let them keep going around with it until they get to the point where they understand, this is what I've been stumbling with in the dark. I see it, I perceive it, I'm ready to understand it. So there's all that, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, if you're intentionally not saying what needs to be said so that it's said in a prettier way, a more acceptable way, if we're controlling, for example, the therapist's script and pre-setting up, handing them a list of words that they can use and a bigger list of what they can't use, then it kind of ties their hands behind their back as far as being efficient in helping us. And what I saw from that experiment was that it untied their hands, metaphorically. It definitely untied their capabilities as far as what can be said and how it's said. While the lesson was difficult to hear, if you actually go through it and break apart what they said and understanding the meaning of it, it frees us from so much crap. It puts perspective on purpose really clear and gives us a understanding of, in all these changes, what to focus on and what's important, a priority list. And isn't that what we need most? So was there a difference and a change? Yeah, there definitely was. And I've practiced with this principle a couple of times now with other channelers and sitting before them and saying, specifically, I'm asking you to go beyond the boundary that we normally work with and bring through information that will break that boundary. I'm willing to hear it. I'm asking the question, ask an honest question, get an honest answer. And the effects have been amazing every time that this has been used. The limitations of the normal placement of where the information goes around took a huge step back, and the outcome has been astounding. In one of them with another channel that specifically works in healing, when this was done, it, what was brought through was how to spontaneous heal. And when you look at the mode of healing, there's the idea of healing, but it sticks to the emotional and mental level. And for those that are Reiki trained, that's the way that it's taught. It's not taught to spontaneous heal, but yet the foundation of Reiki comes from a spontaneous healing. The original ones who worked in Reiki and were trained was to heal, although not spontaneous, but physically heal. And while we talk about that, we talk a good game. But if something came along that needed such a healing, it's go to a doctor. And there's legal reasons why. I get that. But at the same time, isn't it strange? The expectations that were taught in the modality of healing is exactly the way they work with us. And if we ask questions from a communicator like me, in what they talk about. So my question is, getting people to really understand the importance of this technique and exploring it. If the modality that we learned from keeps the healing on an emotional and mental level, and the information when we're connected to them doing the healing, and with communicators like me when questions are asked about it, is kept on that same level of emotional and mental healing. And while sometimes some will talk about spontaneous healing and say that it is possible, here's an interesting question. Why don't they ever explain how to do it? Here's a better question. Why don't the people that's receiving the information that that's possible ask specifically to be trained how to? Wrap that back into free will for a moment. So let's keep it simple. You're at work, and let's just say what you do is processing paperwork. And someone comes along and says, there's a way to do that that's twice as efficient. And we say, oh, it's twice as efficient, and go back to doing what we were doing previously. And we never stop and say, show me that. Then clearly we're not willing to learn. So the information's never passed. It was just said it's possible. But we never stopped what we were doing and said, show me. Show me how to make it twice as efficient. Now, when you look at that example of the healing modality, oh, sure, some have come through and talked about spontaneous healing. But did you ever catch anyone saying, okay, show me how? How does that work? How do we do that? Show me right now. What is a technique? And we're going to follow up on this until we get it right. And the answer is no. They say it, and we, like a parrot saying a prayer, say, it is possible, comma, silent part, but just not through me. Or we play with the potential, but never actually step before someone and try it. And I'm saying that as a Reiki master. So there's that invisible free will I keep talking about. Why don't we want to? Why wouldn't we jump at that chance? Think about, oh my God, revolutionizing what we could do with that. What the potential and possibilities are. and how much that's actually needed right now with what's happening in our society. But we don't ask. Why don't we ask? Better yet, why aren't we demanding? What are we afraid of? And whatever that answer is, there's our free will. There's that invisible boundary that I'm trying to explain to you guys. And in this, it's putting in perspective as a channel. What am I afraid of to bring through a level of information that's going to be different than what we currently know? What would happen if they start bringing through information that counteracts a lot of the spiritual teachings that we've been taught? What happens if they bring through new information that forces us to take a look at changing en masse? It's great to say, I'm here to bring through the information, but what about the consequences of bringing through that information? It's kind of like opening up Pandora's box after a certain point. If you start knocking the pillars from the spiritual community of the way that we look at things and knock enough of them out, it's kind of a big responsibility. So the experiment with it, for what you see in that channel session, to me, was a huge success. And what was the success wasn't the channel session. What was the success was playing with the understanding of free will and learning how to align that in a more effective manner to truly bring through information, to work in the light, to be a light worker. And so the purpose of this video is really to go ahead and explain it in the best way possible. So that other modalities can consider and take a look at that. Consider the possibilities and consider the potential of, and ask the question, what am I really tapping into? And what would happen if I, excuse the pun, open the channel of free will and tap into more? What would happen if intuitives went ahead and opened it up to say, bring through what needs to be brought through? Give me the sight, give me the smell, give me the experience, give me the knowing, and let me see what needs to be truly be said. What would happen if the healers stepped up and said, yes, show me spontaneous healing. Show me how that's done. Jesus did it. He said, greater things you should do than I. And there have been tons of others that have had that experience. So is it possible to bring that experience through in this physical form? The answer is yes. That was the point of all of them that have done it, trying to teach it, was that you too can do it. So what would happen if for the healers, they stood there and said, yes, I can, I want to know. Break the boundary of what's expected. Break the boundary of what is normal. Screw the effing boundary. Teach it to me. I demand to know. Teach me beyond the boundaries that we've been learning at. I'm willing to know. Channelers, I'm willing to break the boundary and allow you free access. What are you willing to say? And whatever that is, I'm willing for it to come through. What do we really need to know? What really needs to be said? And I step out of the way. In all of our modalities, it breaks the norm and puts us outside where we constantly been going around in circles. And I've seen this time and time again in other channel sessions. I quite often go to Judah's session, which is a local channel, and I always get her last name wrong. Sorry, Angie. Angie Hippo, I think. So, and when she was doing, questions for Judah would come in, give the lesson, and then ask for questions. Everyone just sat there. And I've had that experience too as a channel. I've seen it, in other channel sessions. I've seen it in, Bashar when he gets done. He brings through this awesome, amazing information that, don't get me wrong, it sounds great, but we obviously don't understand the basics of it. Because the level of, what you're saying of mind that you're talking about obviously isn't being manifested on this planet. Take a quick look out the window and you see that that is true. And, to me, it's like, well, excited about the principle, but also dealing with, the negative Nancy, the realistic readers parts of ourselves, of, wait a minute, you said this, how the hell, and getting in their face about it, questioning them. No, I want to understand. I want to know. And no, there's no questions about the actual lesson that they actually brought through, the principles that they were teaching. The principles that they keep stating over and over again is true. Instead, the questions come down to some very basic, excuse the language, bullshit on, well, I want to know about my boyfriend and what he's feeling. Ask your boyfriend. What are you asking an alien entity about what your boyfriend feels? Are you effing kidding me? That's what you want to know after the complex things that they just brought through? And, they're always patient. They always deal with it in the most patient way. And we're very lucky for that. But at the same time, it's treating us with kid gloves. And it comes down to it of, if they go ahead and say all these principles, and we're not actually engaging them in conversation about the principles that they just said, you are abundant. You are manifestors. You are, okay, then how do you explain the world that we actually live in? Help me understand this from my perspective. How do I make what you're saying is possible through me? What am I missing? And I'm not going to stop asking questions until I get that. That is someone that wants to learn. That is someone that wants to break the boundaries. Standing there asking polite questions that have nothing to do with the information that they just brought through means you're not willing to know it. Hello? You're not willing. So when they come through again, what are they going to talk about? The same thing. If you go back through the channel lessons, we all like to think we're unique and that what we bring through is special. And you got to understand the channel's perspective. when it's coming through, we're experiencing it. We get the luxury of experiencing it because that energy is coming through us. So you're damn right it's special. You're damn right. It's, oh my God, how could you not see this? Do you understand what they just said? Because we're experiencing it. Then, if we're successful channels, we have to integrate it. And new information can come through. But if we don't, it circles around in the same stuff. But my point is that if you look at the channel information that has come through, let's just say from 60s to 2025 till now, it's the same crap. It's the exact same crap. It hasn't really evolved. It hasn't been new information. It's the same information creatively said a different way. You know, the healing, the modalities that are out there, it's the same crap. It's cycling around the same basic information. It's just creatively put in a new format to hope that we get it. We haven't even scratched the surface of what's possible to know. And we won't. We won't. We won't. Until we show that we're actually willing. That we're actually willing to learn something new. And they keep baiting us. They say something incredible. And we don't engage them. We just say that we accept it, but that's not how we live our lives and actually act it. And so they bring through the information. We feel better when they do because it's not just the words, it's the intention behind the words, which lifts our spirits, makes us feel whole, makes us feel more positive because we're receiving the truth from another mind. And it vibrates our own, whether we are conscious of that or not. And we love, after the meeting, we just dance out of there. And, hey, we feel great. But then it quickly fades. So all we're really doing is going to the meeting, listening to what they say. We don't actually have any interest in what it is that they're talking about. Feed off the energy like a bunch of psychic vampires. And wait for the positive high to come back down, and then go to another meeting, and then do it again, and then do it again. But what we're not doing is actually engaging them. We're not willing. We're not willing. We're not willing to ask the hard questions. We're not willing to demand to know how. We're not willing to step into that uncomfortable zone and said, I hear what you're saying, but I don't understand that. Or even to stand in front of an archangel that's coming through. Let's just say someone's channeling Archangel Michael. And they bring through information and stand there before them and say, I call bullshit. I call bullshit. You say this, but that's not how it works in this world. My experience is blah, 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 blah. So how do you account for that? And it begins a conversation. Oh, well, let's take a look at your thoughts. No, again, I call bullshit because here's my experience where in this situation, I changed my thoughts. I thought differently. I did the affirmations and I still got the same results. Explain that. And it allows them to go through and maybe talk about intentions. It's not the words, it's the energy behind it. You could say a positive affirmation and still be afraid and fill that positive affirmation with your fear. So let's go into the lesson of intentions and understand the importance of what Spirit calls the emotional body and how that influences our manifestations all the time. There's the subconscious constantly reacting behind the scenes to whatever it is we're attempting to create. And that might sound like a confusing concept, but here's my point. If you don't ask the first set of questions, they can't get to that and talk about that because you're not engaging them. And that scenario goes into the healers, the intuitives. If you have a narrow focus because of free will, because you don't understand the way that it actually works. Free will is looked at as, I got the right to do whatever it is that I want to do. Free will is way more complex. That's a child looking at the concept. And I'm not afraid to go ahead and say that out loud. It's a child looking at free will. And, oh, that's offensive. You called me a child. Well, instead of being offended, ask the question, why did I make that statement? Wait a minute, if that's childish, what else is there? Because this is about your mind and how you want to proceed. And if you don't ask the hard questions, you keep getting the same answer because you're not willing for a different one. And so in summary, wrapping up here with this little talk, is that the free will experiment with Spirit, for me, was a huge success. And I'm looking forward to incorporating that into all my channel sessions, and especially working with Archangel Anathiel on deepening that sense of surrender so that it allows her to bring through new information, stuff that hasn't been heard before, going clearly in a new direction, knowing full well not a single bit of that will matter if people are still stumbling over the basics. So if you're a practitioner and you come across this, consider, what are your limitations for whatever your modality that you center around? What would happen if you remove them? How would that information, that level of service, transform? And what would it be capable of? And for people that come to people like us, that are clients, consider how much of your life is left. How long do you expect to live? Because whatever it is that you think you know now, that's all human wisdom you gained from experience. When you pass, flush the toilet, that goes. Because it's all based on physical experience. And when you come back in the body, reincarnation, you don't recall that. There are lives you've had where you were much wiser than what you are now, much more spiritually advanced, much more successful financially. So why don't you know that? Because when you go, all that gets flushed. You start over again, learning. You have potential. But we have a very strong tendency not to remember our past lives unless there's something we're really afraid of. And we claim we have that knowledge. Do we really? Let's just, again, take a quick look at how many times we repeat the same pattern in history. If we really had all this wonderful knowledge about past life, why are we doing on this planet what we're doing now? Haven't we been down this road before? Don't we know where this leads? We learned this in history books this life, and we still don't care. What makes you think your past life is going to come into play? We're not even bringing up the wisdom that we've learned in this life, and we're repeating the same mistake over again. That's going to come to the same conclusion that it did last time. So if you're going to stand there and say, oh, no, it doesn't fade. Really? Really? Uh-huh. Sure, Jan. So my point is, how long do you have left? And what are you afraid of? If you engage and demand an answer. And I say this, I said it on another video, I'll say it now. I watched Mansoor because I love the way Spirit, the ones that I work with, deal with people. Do not treat us special. Do not treat us above. They go out of their way to say specifically, we are your brothers and sisters. The only difference between us is our level of perception of ourselves. No airs. And so he went into Judah's session and asked a very difficult question, in fact, confronted in the way the information was being brought through. Judah was ecstatic. Judah was so pleased. Finally, someone engaging me. And Judah's response to his question was, this was a very high-level question. High level. What it could be interpreted as rude. How dare you question what I said? How dare you question in the way that I did it? Who do you think you are? There was none of that. There was none of that. And if that comes out, question the energy source that's coming through. And there's a difference between being specifically rude, where your intention is not knowledge. Your intention is to hurt and disruption. Not the same thing, not what we're talking about. But sometimes when we go after the truth, it's messy. Especially when it's really important. Because what's centered around that is usually anger, frustration that we've dealt with. It's always one of the two or a combination of both. So what? Let it be messy. Stop trying to hide it. Stop trying to pretend like it's not part of the experience. Of course it is. Get involved. Get engaged. Ask the hard questions. And, the invitation is to really take a look at free will again and ask ourselves as practitioners or clients, how have we limited ourselves with that? We've used it to literally place a gag over our mouth. And this video is hopefully an opportunity to shed some light on that for people to remove that. And the potential and possibility is finally finally, as Nathiel would say, we get to some new information. And we advance spiritually and actually accept what they've been telling us over and over again since the 60s. All right, guys. That's my findings on the free will. You guys have a great day.